I was washing dishes when the memory of Matt's voice hit me so hard I nearly dropped a plate. "So, funny thing about the night we met," he had said a few weeks earlier, his tone casual in that way that always made me feel like we were on the same side of a secret. I turned off the water and leaned on the counter, staring at the window over the sink while the city light bled orange through the blinds. 4.5 years together, two of them living in this apartment, and I still sometimes had these moments of vertigo, like I was looking down over the edge of my own life. Matt's hoodie was thrown over the back of our kitchen chair, his keys in their usual careless pile near the fruit bowl. My boyfriend, my almost but not yet fiancé, the man I wanted to marry, and the man I now couldn't stop picturing with another man. It started with that conversation on the couch 3 weeks ago. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and lazy, our legs tangled as we watched some documentary he'd put on about queer history. Matt loves that stuff, not in a "I'm performing wokeness" way, but in the quiet, steady way he cares about people being allowed to exist as themselves. When I first met him, I noticed how he never made the cheap joke, never rolled his eyes at pronouns, never brushed off a story about someone coming out. If anything, he got protective, which I found ridiculously attractive. He's always been like that about everything, really. Society says men don't cry. He tears up at movies and doesn't apologize. Society says you should have kids. He shrugs and says only if we both really want to, not because we're supposed to. He has this moral compass that isn't about rules, but about harm. If it's not illegal and it doesn't hurt anyone, he'll say, I don't see what business it is of anybody else's. That afternoon, we'd pause the documentary so he could go off on some tangent about how ridiculous it is that people care who someone else sleeps with. And somehow, it turned into a conversation about our own histories. "I still can't believe you thought I was straight when we met," he said, nudging my shoulder. "I mean, you were flirting with me pretty hard," I pointed out. "But we were at Theo's party," he said. "Everyone was flirting with everyone." I laughed because that part was true. Theo's parties back then were legendary, crowded apartments that felt like they were breathing, music too loud, drinks too strong, conversation spilling into the hallway. I could still remember the first time I saw Matt there 4.5 years ago. He was leaning against the kitchen counter in this faded band t-shirt, talking to a guy with a septum piercing about some philosophy podcast. I remember watching his hands as he spoke, how he gestured like he was sculpting the air, how his laugh cut through the noise and made people turn toward him. I remember thinking, "You were too cool for me," I said now, picking at a loose thread on the couch throw. He snorted. "Me? Cool? Okay, sure. You know what's funny, though? That night, I wasn't even sure if I should flirt with you. I'd just been seeing someone." "Someone?" I repeated. "Like, someone? He hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on my knee, and then he said it, calmly, like it was just another detail of the story. "Yeah, a friend, actually. You know Avery?" I froze, just for a second. I knew Avery. Tall, sharp cheekbones, wicked sense of humor, and lately, a growing confidence as she tried out her new name, her new pronouns. We'd seen her at a few get-togethers in the last year, her style shifting into something more feminine each time. She and Matt always hugged a little longer, shared this unspoken familiarity. At the time, Matt went on, Avery wasn't Avery yet. We were just two guys who hooked up sometimes. It wasn't super serious, but it was consistent. There was a soft rushing in my ears. I blinked. Hooked up? Like, he gave me that look that says, you know exactly what I mean, but I'll respect your need to hear it out loud. Like, sex, yeah, he said. We were friends who sometimes slept together. It started kind of casually, and then just kept going. I felt a flicker of something. Jealousy? Surprise? It was like someone had untied a knot in my understanding of him. I'd always known he was open-minded. I'd always suspected, in this vague, abstract way, that maybe he wasn't 100% straight, but he'd never labeled himself, never brought up past experiences with men. My heart was pounding, but he kept talking, his voice calm. Anyway, he said, that night at Theo's, I'd been texting with him, well, her, but at the time, you know what I mean, and we had plans to meet up after the party. Then I met you, and I was like, oh, oh no, oh yes. You were there in that green dress, laughing with Jess in the kitchen, and suddenly I was torn. You slept with Avery that night? I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I meant it to. He nodded. After the party, yeah, we already had plans, and honestly, at that point, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't even have your number. You were this incandescent person I'd bumped into for a few hours. There was a beat of silence between us then, the kind that stretches and tests the air. My first reaction was pure, startled shock. Another man. My boyfriend, with another man. A man who's now a woman. It was like my brain didn't know where to file the information. It scrambled for jealousy, for insecurity, for something familiar and predictable. And then, in the middle of that confusion, another feeling rose up, slow and warm and undeniable. I was turned on. It embarrassed me how fast that shift happened. While Matt watched my face carefully, ready to reassure me, my mind was already painting pictures. Matt in some dim bedroom, his body pressed against his friend's, mouths open, hands urgent. The fact that this friend had since begun transitioning made the images even more vivid, this blurred, beautiful line between categories I'd always treated as separate. I tried to play it cool. Wow, I said, my cheeks hot. That's a lot to drop on a girl on a Sunday. He smiled nervously. I've been meaning to tell you for a while. Not because it changes anything, just it's part of my history, and I trust you. I never want you to feel like I'm hiding anything. You're the one I chose. That, whatever you call it, situation, ended pretty soon after we met because I realized I wanted to actually try with you. For real, monogamously. You don't miss it? I asked. My voice was too casual. I heard it and winced internally. He thought about it. I miss the freedom sometimes, I guess, not specific people, but the sense that everything was open and fluid. But honestly, the thing that feels most like freedom now is knowing I can tell you this, and you won't think I'm a monster. I swallowed, my heart twisting. I definitely don't think you're a monster, I said. If anything, I think you're brave. We talked a little more. Him filling in details at a high level, how he and Avery had drifted apart romantically, but stayed friends, how he'd supported her when she started exploring her gender. Nothing graphic, nothing lurid, just facts, offered with quiet respect. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. The younger version of him, kissing another guy in some messy bedroom, the way he might look in eyeliner, the softness in Avery's eyes now compared to the guarded way she'd carried herself before transition. And then there was me, floating at the edge of those scenes, half observer, half participant. Over the next few days, it only got worse, or better, depending on how you frame it. On breaks at work, I found myself reading articles about bisexual men, about trans women and dating, about crossdressing. I scrolled Reddit threads late into the night about mixed orientation relationships and shared fantasies. I devoured personal essays from women who'd discovered new layers of their desire in their 30s. Something had cracked open in me. I'd always thought of myself as straight, vanilla-ish, but not rigid. Suddenly, I was walking around with this electric awareness humming under my skin. The idea of seeing Matt with another person, especially someone like Avery, wasn't just a passing curiosity. It was a vivid, consuming desire. I imagined him trying on a dress in our bedroom, slippery fabric over his shoulders, my hands buttoning the back. I imagined being there, watching as he rediscovered that part of himself with someone else, knowing he was still mine, still choosing me, and that I was allowed to be there for it. And then, almost immediately, the guilt came. Was I fetishizing him? Was I just turning his past and Avery's identity into some private porn in my head? I thought about how often trans women talked about being treated like fantasies instead of people. The last thing I wanted was to project that onto someone he cared about. And what if he didn't want that anymore? What if all of that was part of his past, a closed chapter, and by bringing it up, I'd be pressuring him back into a version of himself he'd outgrown? One night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a half-written email to a therapist on the screen, and my best friend Jess on FaceTime. I'd hesitated about telling anyone, but Jess and I had made a pact years ago, no secrets about the big stuff. "So," she said slowly after I'd spilled everything, "you're turned on by the idea of your boyfriend being with other people, specifically with this friend who's now a trans woman, and you're also into the idea of him possibly dressing up, but you don't want to pressure him or make him feel like a fetish." "Pretty much," I said, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. "Also, I don't want to screw up our relationship, like, at all. I want to marry him, Jess. I've literally been looking at rings on Instagram." "Okay," she said. "So what scares you more, never telling him and keeping this locked in your head, or telling him and having an awkward but honest conversation?" I thought about coming home every day, kissing him hello, making dinner, and never letting him see this part of me, never letting myself see his reaction, slowly building a life on a foundation that had this one big humming secret buried under it. "That it would change the way he sees me," I said finally. "What if he thinks I only see him as this label, or that I'm trying to push him into something? He's never even hinted at wanting to be with anyone else since we started dating." Jess tilted her head. "You know him. How does he usually respond to people telling him honest truths about who they are?" "He's kind," I admitted. "Curious. He asks questions. He tries to understand." "Do you trust him?" she asked. "With everything," I said automatically. "Then trust him with this," she said. "But do it the way he does things, with consent. Make it about listening, not pushing. You're not saying, 'Hey, go hook up with someone for me.' You're saying, 'This part of your story stirred something in me, and I'd like to talk about it if you're open to that.' That's it. No agenda." It sounded so simple when she said it. Of course it wasn't, not really, but that framing lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. Over the next week, I thought about how Matt always gave people an out. If I told him I didn't want to go to some social thing, he didn't sulk. He just said, "Thanks for telling me." If a friend seemed uncomfortable, he'd say, "We don't have to talk about this if you don't want to." That was part of why I loved him. He left room. I decided I owed him the same. The night I finally brought it up, I didn't plan a big dramatic setup. It was a Tuesday. We'd eaten leftovers on the couch and were halfway through a rewatch of some comfort show. The lights were low, just the warm glow of the lamp behind us and the flicker of the TV. His arm was around me, his thumb tracing lazy circles on my shoulder. "Hey," I said, during a lull in the episode, my voice a little too bright. "Can I ask you something slightly vulnerable?" He muted the TV and turned toward me immediately. "Always." That alone made my throat tighten. I picked at the seam of the pillowcase, trying to steady my breathing. "Remember when you told me about you and Avery?" I said. "From before we met?" His expression shifted, alert, a little worried, but open. "Yeah, of course. Is that still on your mind?" "Kind of constantly," I admitted, and his eyes widened. "Not in a bad way," I rushed to add. "Just, it stirred a lot up for me." He frowned slightly. "If it made you uncomfortable, I'm really sorry. I just wanted to be honest." "It didn't," I said. "I mean, I was surprised at first, yeah, but mostly, okay, I'm just going to say this, and if at any point you're like, nope, too much, you can tell me to stop, and I will. No pressure, no expectations. Deal?" He smiled faintly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Deal." I took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "It was really sexy to me," I said. "Hearing about it, knowing that part of you existed or exists, or whatever the right tense is. I keep thinking about you with another person, especially someone like Avery, and about you exploring different sides of yourself, and it's made me realize I might be a lot more fluid, curious than I thought." For a moment, he just stared at me, My heart hammered. I forced myself not to fill the silence with nervous babble. Finally, he said slowly, "You're turned on by that?" "Yes," I said. "Deeply. Embarrassingly. And I've been spiraling because the last thing I want is to make you feel like I see you as this fetish, or like I want to push you into something you don't want. I know you've never brought up being with anyone else while we've been together, and I trust that. I trust you. I'm happy with you. I want to marry you. This isn't me saying I'm dissatisfied. It's just something that lit up in me when you shared that part of your past, and I don't want to hide that from you." His face softened in this way I'd only seen a few times, like when we told each other we loved each other, or when he met my little niece for the first time. He reached out and took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "Seriously, that means a lot." I exhaled, some of the tightness loosening in my chest. "You're not weirded out?" I asked. "Oh, I'm definitely a little overwhelmed," he said, chuckling under his breath. "But not in a bad way, just surprised, in a good way. I kind of assumed if I talked too much about that period of my life, you'd feel threatened or grossed out, so I kept it vague." "I don't feel grossed out at all," I said. "Confused sometimes, yeah, but mostly curious and adventurous." I hesitated, then added, "I've been reading a lot about bisexual men and trans women and cross-dressing and all kinds of stuff, and God, I sound like such a nerd." "You sound like yourself," he said. "You research what you care about." Tears pricked my eyes. "I just don't want you to think I'm trying to turn your history and Avery's identity into my fantasy. She's a person, not a prop, and you're you. I don't want to poke at old wounds or pressure you to revisit something that's done." He squeezed my hand. "Can I tell you what I'm hearing?" he asked. "Please." "I'm hearing, I love you, I trust you. I was turned on by something you shared, and I'm curious if there's space for us to talk about it more. But I don't want to push, and I respect everyone involved." That's honestly kind of the healthiest way you could possibly bring this up. I let out a shaky laugh. "I rehearsed it a lot." He nodded. "And you gave me an out. You said I could tell you to stop. That matters. I don't want to use that right now, but it matters that it's there." "So, how do you feel about it?" I asked. "Like, about that part of your past? About the idea of anything related to it in the present? No wrong answers." He leaned back, thinking. The TV cast soft blue light across his face. "I'm complicated about it," he said finally. "I'm not straight. I don't love labels, but if we're being real, I'm probably some flavor of bi or pan. Being with guys was good and fun and sometimes really emotionally meaningful. Being with Avery was important, and I'm still really fond of her. I also made a very deliberate choice when we got serious to be monogamous with you. I haven't wanted to be with anyone else since. That's not me repressing anything. That's just where my desire naturally goes now." My stomach tightened. "So the idea of anything else is off the table?" He shook his head. "I didn't say that. I think there's a difference between fantasy and reality. There's a difference between talking about something, role-playing something, maybe even exploring certain things between us, like me trying on different clothes or us watching something together, and actually involving a third person, especially someone like Avery, who has her own history and feelings and isn't just a puzzle piece we plug into our sex life." Relief and disappointment swirled together in my chest, neither winning. "That makes sense," I said. "I don't want to do anything that would make you or her feel used." He nodded. "I also don't hate the idea of talking more about that part of my life," he admitted. "You being into it makes it feel less like a shameful footnote and more like just another facet of me that's kind of incredible." I blinked back more tears. "So could we, I don't know, talk about it sometimes? In a safe, non-pushy way, and maybe explore some of the clothes thing? If and only if you want to. You can always say no." He smiled, slow and genuine. "Yeah," he said. "I think we could. We can go at our own pace. Check in a lot. Use safe words if we need them, even if it's just for conversation. I love that you trust me with this part of you, Jen. It makes me feel closer to you, not further away. I exhaled, my whole body buzzing with relief. I was so afraid you'd think I was ruining everything, I said, like you'd see me differently. I do see you differently, he said, but in the way you see a room in a house you've lived in for years suddenly in sunlight. Same room, but now there's more depth, more color. It's beautiful. And yeah, a little scary, but mostly beautiful. I leaned into him then, resting my head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. The TV flickered silently in front of us, some sitcom characters frozen mid-joke. Our apartment smelled like the last of the leftovers and his cologne and the faint hint of laundry detergent from the basket in the hallway. We didn't make any big decisions that night. We didn't text Avery or buy lingerie or draft a threesome contract. We just talked. I told him more about the articles I'd read, the fantasies that scared me, the way my understanding of myself was shifting. He told me about his early 20s, the joy and mess of those years, the ways he'd learned to be gentle with his own desires. Every few minutes, one of us would check in. Are you okay? Do you want to keep going? Is this still feeling good? And every time, the answer was yes. Later, in bed, as we lay in the dark, he spoke into the quiet. For what it's worth, he said, if we ever did decide to involve anyone else or try anything bigger, I'd want to do it slowly, with lots of talking, maybe with a therapist. I'd want all of us, whoever us is, to be on the same page. No surprises. That sounds right, I said. I'm not in a rush. This isn't a demand. It's just a door I didn't know existed that suddenly cracked open. I'm okay taking a long time to decide if we ever want to walk through it. He kissed the top of my head. I love you, he said, exactly as you are. Curious, anxious, overthinking everything, and brave enough to tell me anyway. I love you too, I whispered. Exactly as you are. Complicated, fluid, open-hearted, and honest enough to let me see it. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that for all my fear of risking the relationship, the real risk would have been never saying anything at all. Hiding this new, shimmering part of myself from the person I wanted to spend my life with. It wasn't the fantasy that mattered most. It was the trust that we could talk about it, gently, with consent and care. Whatever came next, whether we kept it as fantasy, whether he tried on a dress in our bedroom someday, whether we just filed this away as a chapter of self-discovery, I knew we'd face it the way we faced everything else, together with the option to pause, to say no, to change our minds. And that, in its own quiet way, was the sexiest thing of all. Of